Look at any crowd anywhere on Earth and you will notice something that does not quite make sense. One species, same skeleton, same blood, same ancient ancestors, same basic wiring inside the skull, but skin that runs from the deepest brown to the palest pink. For thousands of years, humans tried to explain that difference, and they got it catastrophically wrong. They turned it into stories, then into tribes, then into empires, then into something they called race. They convinced themselves that skin color was evidence that humans had been divided into fundamentally different kinds of people. But biology was never saying any of that. Skin color was never a dividing line. It was never about the categories humans invented. It was about a problem. A very specific, very ancient problem. One that came from the sky. The strange part is that the very thing keeping humans alive was also trying to destroy them. And over thousands of generations, your ancestors had to find a balance between two opposite dangers. Block too much of it, and you die one way. Let too much of it through, and you die another. So how did one species end up wearing so many different colors? The answer does not start with nations or borders or any of the stories people tell about each other. It starts in Africa, with a small, mostly naked, sweating creature standing under a sun that was trying its best to kill it. For most mammals, skin is not the first thing sunlight touches. Fur is. Fur acts as shade, as insulation, as a barrier between the body and the outside world. It blocks ultraviolet radiation before it ever reaches the skin beneath. But at some point in our evolutionary past, our ancestors did something that looked, on the surface, like a terrible idea. They lost most of their fur. Scientists still debate exactly when this happened, but the leading explanation comes down to one word: heat. A fur-covered animal running in open sunlight overheats fast. It has to stop. It has to find shade. It is limited in how long it can sustain effort before its body temperature becomes dangerous. But a mostly hairless animal that sweats has a strange and powerful advantage. It can keep going. It can walk for hours under a midday sun. It can follow prey across open savanna while every other predator has been forced to stop and cool down. Sweat works best on bare skin. The more skin is exposed, the more efficient the cooling system becomes. So our ancestors made a trade. They gave up fur to gain endurance, but that trade came with a consequence nobody could have planned for, because without fur, the sky could reach the body directly. And near the equator, what comes from that sky is not gentle. Ultraviolet radiation, UV light, is powerful enough to burn skin in hours. It is powerful enough to damage the DNA inside your cells, and it is powerful enough to break down a molecule called folate. Folate is a B vitamin. Your body uses it to build new cells, repair damaged DNA, support healthy reproduction, and sustain early pregnancy. When UV radiation breaks down folate in significant amounts, the ability to reproduce successfully starts to decline. And in the logic of evolution, reproduction is not a minor detail. It is the only test that actually matters. A body can be strong, fast, clever, and nearly perfect in every way. But if it fails to produce surviving offspring, evolution quietly removes that design from the population. So, as early humans lived under the full force of tropical sunlight, natural selection began to favor bodies that could protect their folate, bodies that could shield themselves from the damage UV radiation was doing. That protection came in the form of melanin. Melanin is the pigment responsible for skin color, but calling it a pigment almost undersells what it actually does. Melanin is a biological shield. It absorbs ultraviolet radiation and scatters it before that radiation can penetrate deep enough to do serious damage. The more melanin your skin produces, the more protection you have under intense sunlight. This is why populations whose ancestors spent thousands of generations living near the equator tend to have a darker skin. Not because they are a different kind of human, because their ancestors lived under stronger UV radiation, and their bodies adapted accordingly. Dark skin was not decorative. It was not cosmetic. It was not a sign of anything cultural or social. It was survival technology. The original sunscreen, built by evolution, refined over thousands of generations, and it worked. But then humans did what humans do. They moved. Over tens of thousands of years, groups of Homo sapiens spread slowly out of Africa. They crossed deserts, followed coastlines, moved through dense forests, climbed into mountain ranges, and eventually reached cold plains, cloudy islands, and the dim northern edges of the world. And the farther some groups traveled from the equator, the problem changed completely. The danger was no longer too much sunlight. It was too little. More specifically, too little UVB. the specific band of ultraviolet radiation that the human body uses to produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is not optional. Your body needs it to absorb calcium, build and maintain strong bones, support immune function, and sustain normal biological processes across the entire body. Without enough of it, children can develop rickets, a disease where bones soften and deform. Pregnancies become riskier. Immune systems weaken. Survival gets harder in ways that compound over time. Now, human skin was facing the exact opposite problem it started with. Dark skin, which had been an extraordinary advantage under tropical sunlight, could become a liability in places where the sun was weak for most of the year. Because the same melanin that blocked harmful UV near the equator also blocked the limited UVB that northern bodies desperately needed. So, in low UV environments, natural selection began favoring something different: less melanin. Not because of temperature. Cold does not change skin color. Sunlight does. Lighter skin allowed more UVB to enter the body. More UVB meant more vitamin D. More vitamin D meant stronger bones, healthier pregnancies, and better odds of survival in an environment where the sun gave very little. The real map of human skin color does not follow heat. It follows ultraviolet radiation. And that distinction matters because it is the thing that explains what is actually happening on a biological level. But the story refuses to stay simple. Because humans are complicated. Migration is complicated. Diet is complicated. History is very complicated. Take Arctic populations as an example. Many groups living in extremely northern latitudes did not develop the very pale skin you might expect given how little sunlight reaches their part of the world. Why? Because large parts of their traditional diet consisted of fish and marine mammals, foods that are naturally rich in vitamin D. If your food is already providing the vitamin D your body needs, your skin does not need to let in as much weak northern sunlight to compensate. Diet changed the evolutionary pressure, which means there is no perfect skin color chart that maps cleanly onto geography. There are patterns, but not clean boxes. And this is exactly where the idea of race begins to collapse, because skin color does not divide humans into neat biological categories. It shifts gradually across geography. It changes based on diet. It blends at every border. It mixes wherever populations meet. There is no sharp line where one kind of human ends and another begins. There are only populations whose ancestors adapted to different amounts of sunlight, then moved, mixed, adapted again, and kept moving. If you had walked slowly northward from Central Africa thousands of years ago, you would not have crossed a border where humans suddenly changed. You would have seen gradual shifts, continuous variation, different bodies shaped by different skies, different foods, different amounts of time in different places. The categories came from culture, not from biology. Skin color became one of the most visible human differences. So societies assigned it meaning. Then hierarchy, then violence, then entire systems built on the fiction that it indicated something fundamental about the people wearing it. But evolution was never making that argument. Evolution was solving a chemistry problem. How do you protect folate from UV damage while still allowing enough UV to produce vitamin D? That is the entire puzzle. Melanin is the dial, turn it up where the sun is powerful, turn it down where the sun is scarce. Not because one setting is superior, because different environments ask different things from the human body. And here's the part that should permanently change how you think about this. Lighter skin in Europe and lighter skin in parts of East Asia did not develop through the same genetic changes. Evolution found similar solutions using completely different biological tools, which means there was no single moment when humans became pale. No single moment when humans became dark. Those are modern words placed over a much older, much slower process that was never aware of the labels being attached to it. The first Homo sapiens were almost certainly darker skinned than many people living today, because our species emerged in Africa under intense ultraviolet radiation, and melanin was the solution that worked. But even that has to be said carefully. They were not black in any modern social sense. They were ancient humans with skin adapted to a specific sky. The categories arrived much later. The biology came first. Think of sunlight as a problem with two dangers. Too much UV reaches the skin. Folate breaks down. Reproduction suffers. The population declines. Too little UV reaches the skin. Vitamin D drops. Bones weaken. Survival rates fall. Melanin is the body's answer to both dangers at once. The right amount for the right environment. Not a ranking, not a hierarchy. An adjustment. But then the modern world dissolved all the old rules. People now move across the entire planet in hours. A person whose ancestors adapted to weak northern sunlight can find themselves living under brutal equatorial radiation. A person whose ancestors adapted to intense tropical UV can spend their life in a cloudy northern city where their skin gets almost no direct sunlight for months. Your skin still carries the instructions written by ancient environments, but your life may be happening under a completely different sky. And that gap between the skin you inherited and the world you actually live in is something worth paying attention to. Skin color feels permanent. It feels like identity, like family, like something you carry as part of who you are. And it is all of those things, but it is also something else. It is evidence of movement. Every shade of human skin is a record of migration, of deserts crossed and coastlines followed, of winters endured and sunlight absorbed by people whose names disappeared long before history started writing anything down. People who had no idea they were slowly shaping the appearance of every human being who would come after them. They were just trying to survive long enough to have children. And over thousands of generations, the sky wrote itself into their skin. So why did humans end up with different skin colors? Because we left one place and learned to survive in many. Because the same star that made life possible on this planet was also capable of damaging the bodies living under it. Because evolution had to solve two opposite problems simultaneously: protect the body from sunlight and let sunlight in. And it solved that problem differently depending on where people were standing. Skin color is not a ranking. It is not a border. It is not evidence that humans are separate. It is evidence that humans are one species, flexible enough, resilient enough, and determined enough to survive almost anywhere on this planet. A species that began under one African sun, spread across every environment Earth had to offer, and carried the memory of those skies on their skin. Every shade is a survival story. Every color is a map. And every human alive today is walking around with ancient sunlight written somewhere on their body as a quiet record of everywhere their ancestors have ever been.